My name is Linda Sarsour. I am born and raised in Brooklyn, New York.
Nice to meet you.
I consider myself to be a feminist, and maybe not the traditional sense of the word feminist, or what people think when they think feminist.
Okay, well, that's probably a good thing, to be honest.
Patriarchy. I'm reading fuckface.
But what is your personal interpretation of feminism? Because it is a religion with numerous denominations.
My parents instilled in me that I am the voice of the second, third generation of Palestinian Americans.
Why the fuck would they do that? I mean, seriously, were they planning on raising an egomaniac?
Hey, this is the British government you're talking to here. Right, I represent the people of Great Britain. Isn't that right, people of Great Britain? Yes! So get them on the fucking line now. The people of Great Britain want a fucking word.
That satire, by the way, is supposed to be funny, but you actually mean it, don't you? And you haven't even been elected to anything. I don't see how you can possibly figure that you are the voice of anybody but yourself. And what's more, you were born and raised in America. You're about as Palestinian as Jerry Seinfeld. I mean, this identity politics winds me up at the best of times. But in your case, you've crafted an identity for yourself around a state that you've got nothing to do with. You have no experience of. That's bananas. But more importantly, can we consider people based on what they think and how they act, rather than where they happen to be born or who their parents are? Can we do that, please? Ugh, this person is annoying me already.
I have a bad feeling about this.
One thing that has come up a lot for me as a Muslim woman is this idea of humility.
What, and the fact that you need to develop more of it, or...?
I have been told numerous occasions, you're too visible, you're too loud, you're too outspoken. I'm not going to be humble to the point where I'm quiet.
Well, you understand the difference between being too loud and overbearing and not saying anything at all, right? I mean, there's a middle ground there that some people are perhaps suggesting that you need to find. But I think that your appearance on this advert sort of testifies to the fact that you don't have a huge amount of difficulty in getting your voice heard.
The idea behind modesty in Islam is for people to be able to judge me by my character, not by the way that I look.
Bullshit.
Yeah, let's hear that again.
Bullshit.
The idea behind modesty in Islam is the same as the idea behind pretty much everything else in Islam. It is a demonstration of your obedience to the will of Allah. And Allah does not care about your character outside of the degree to which you follow his fucking rules. And more importantly, because Allah is in fact fictitious, newsflash here for you, right? But your imaginary friend is not actually real. What this is properly about is other human beings in the here and now controlling you and your behavior. And the specific aspect of you that is being controlled in the promotion of modesty, say, is your sexuality, which, contrary to what you might think, is actually an incredibly important part of what makes us fully functioning, healthy and expressive human beings.
I'm very proud to wear a hijab. I don't think that wearing my hijab takes away from anything that I can do or be.
Well, it symbolises that you're morally and intellectually within the clutches of a barbaric Middle Eastern cult, but let's leave that aside for a second. Practically, what does it do? Does it prevent you from getting the groceries? Does it prevent you from finding a job? No, but that's because you live in the United States, where the freedom of the individual is held in high regard. The question we should actually be asking ourselves is, if we were to pluck you out of New York City right now and place you in a society that is run along strict Islamic lines, do the same degrees of freedom remain? Let's take Palestine, the state with which you so proudly identify. Does Hamas respect the right of you and your fellow Muslim sisters to remove the hijab in public? Of course they don't. Do they fuck? And yes, being proud of wearing something that is forced upon millions of women around the world on pain of death does reveal something rather sinister about you. I'm sorry to say.
Islam is very clear about the encouragement of the education of women. I mean, there's just so many clear examples of the leadership roles that women have held.
sorry, but if we're going to be listening to fairy tales, then they might as well be good ones.
Once upon a time, in a faraway land.
I mean, where do you start with that fucking horror of a statement? First of all, I have to say I've read many of these so-called passages in the Quran that supposedly cite the importance of education, and I found them sufficiently underwhelming. They seem to be mostly concerned with education in the word of Allah, not general education. It doesn't say, go forth and read Plato and study algebra. That's not in there, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Okay, the problem, of course, is that the Quran is a multi-passage book, and different Muslims prioritize different things. Here's an example of a passage that's concerned specifically with women that brings an entirely different message. And abide in your houses, and do not display yourselves, as was the display of the former times of ignorance, and establish prayer, and give zakah, whatever that is, and obey Allah and His Messenger. Allah intends only to remove from you the impurity of sin, O people of the Prophet's household, and to purify you with extensive purification. And this is exactly the kind of passage that groups like ISIS use, for example, to justify why they want women over the age of 15 in the home, serving God and making babies. And the last time I checked, they had the ideological backing of tens of millions of Muslims around the world. Link in the description. This is a particularly patriarchal passage, and I wonder how feminists would feel about that, considering how we began this video. But Islam is far from clear on these points. It's decidedly unclear, it's theologically muddy, and that's the problem. In practical terms, what that translates to is total chaos in the real world. Case in point, an individual who's arguably my nomination for the world's greatest living person, Malala Yousafzai, when she attempted to get educational rights for people in Pakistan, she got fucking shot in the head. And the Taliban who carried out that assault are often fond of quoting this passage from the Quran. O you who have believed, obey Allah and obey the Messenger and those in authority among you. In other words, we're in authority among you, and if we say you don't get to go to school, you don't get to go to fucking school. And we'll have no back chat on that. This debate is going on right now in the Islamic world between Muslims like Malala, who want educational rights for people, and Muslims like ISIS and the Taliban, who will kill them for asking. And we haven't even got into the question yet of what constitutes an education as far as Islamic scholars are concerned. What you have to remember is this woman is speaking to an audience in New York City who probably assume, like most of us would, that when we talk about education, we're talking about, quantum physics, science and philosophy. Islamic schools in the UK do not teach proper science because they instruct their children that the Earth is 6,000 years old or whatever, and that evolution is a myth. And that's not fucking education. That is a disgrace. And that's going on in the UK right now in 2015. So God knows what they're getting away with in Kabul and Karachi. God only knows. Islam is very clear. I mean, what's becoming increasingly clear, what's becoming very transparent is how full of shit you are. That's what's becoming fucking clear.
When there has been oppressive behavior against Muslim women worldwide, most often that has come from political reasons or even cultural reasons. Oppression of women is absolutely shunned in the Islamic faith.
Once upon a time, in a faraway land, a young prince lived in a shining castle.
Alright, so this is just getting really ridiculous now. Politics and culture. Do you know what culture is? Do you think culture and religion are these entirely separate forces that don't overlap or intersect at any point? The religion is the culture in these places. The religion is the politics in a lot of these places. Iran is a theocracy. It's run out of the fucking book. Sharia is the official law in a bunch of Muslim countries. Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Yemen. I mean, I can't tell whether you don't know this, or whether you are in fact succumbing to what evolutionary psych professor Gad Saad has coined ostrich syndrome. And I think it's probably that. I think you are sticking your head in the sand. You are refusing to call a spade and acknowledge that the religion of Islam might have something to do with a lot of the regressive attitude that we see in this part of the world. And the oppression of women is shunned? You must be joking. Pew did a study 2 years ago where they went into the Middle East and they asked people, do you think that wives should always obey their husbands? They got a yes response of around 90%. They asked them, do you think women should have the right to divorce if they so choose? They got a no response of around 70%. Both of these opinions backed up and justified by reference to the Quran. And if you want more, go to thereligionofpeace.com and read for yourself an Everest of information about all the specific ways in which, theologically and practically, Islam is in fact a patriarchal and oppressive religion. And then see if you can square the fact that this woman is denying reality based upon all the available evidence. It's frankly pathetic.
I don't like to go to mosques where men and women are in different floors or if women are in a smaller space.
Wait, what? Oh, so you're on my side of the argument now. You do acknowledge that there's segregation and discrimination in certain sections of the community. You just, avoid those sections? Okay, well, that's good for you. I mean, presumably you can do that because you live in New York City. But what about all the people that don't and can't? I mean, do you care about them? I think as a Muslim and a human being, you're supposed to care about them, and I certainly care about them, and I'm only half of that. So why not take up the mantle of reform? Why not join people like Majid Nawaz and Irshad Manji, who are actually attempting to address these points, attempting to drag the barbaric and backward parts of the faith into the 21st century? Why not do that, instead of deny the problem? Or in a small breath sort of acknowledge a bit of the problem, but go, it doesn't really affect me, so don't care. I mean, fuck me, girl.
Disappointed!
If we're following the footsteps of our prophet never did that. It's not an Islamic principle, like dividers between people praying. Like that just wasn't something that existed in the founding of Islam.
Follow in the footsteps of Muhammad. Yeah, I'd be a little bit careful about recommending that if I were you, because probably one of the reasons why he didn't install the segregation that we're talking about is that he was too busy at the time chopping the heads off Jews and fucking little girls, so he didn't quite get around to it. But hey, look, I'm glad you acknowledge that segregation is not good. Maybe you will work at addressing it in the future. I'm skeptical, but fingers crossed.
When people see me, they think that I'm an anomaly, that there's only one or two or three of me, when in fact there are millions of Muslim women across the world, and particularly here in the United States, who are strong, who are confident, who are educated, and who are making a difference in our society.
That was incredibly nauseating for the most part. I'm not entirely sure who this person is, but she strikes me as like the female Reza Aslan, maybe. In other words, she displays a level of religious apologetics that is completely useless in terms of actually helping us address real problems in the real world, and it just makes me want to vomit, quite frankly. So Salman, please cleanse my soul and the souls of the audience, and I will see you guys next time.
I mean, I think honor culture is a very dangerous thing, and we come from it. And the thing about, to put it very simply, Judeo-Christian culture has at its opposite poles sin and redemption. There's no original sin in Islam. There's no idea of original sin. So the question of sin and redemption doesn't exist. What exists instead at the opposite poles are honor and shame.
Right.
And that's what mobilizes these kind of strong feelings. The trouble with honor culture is if you look at the way in which it's actually been applied inside the societies which hold to those values, is first of all, it's been used immensely to oppress women. Mm-hmm. Women are believed to be, oddly, honor is believed to reside in the male, but shame is brought about by the behavior of the female. And so in order to prevent the man from being shamed by the behavior of the woman, you have to stop the woman doing more or less anything. Some of this is ludicrous and comical. I remember at the early days of the Iranian Revolution, when a number of bizarre issues like this were being debated by the Ayatollahs in Qom. One of the questions, this is seriously, this is not a joke. One of the questions that was asked was if a woman is wearing head-to-toe chadar, but she's wearing Western clothes underneath, she's wearing a skirt underneath, is that okay or not okay? I mean, given that she's completely covered. And all you can see are her eyes. Right? And it was decreed that it was not okay. The reason it was not okay was that the friction of her thighs against each other inside the skirt would generate sexual heat. And this heat would be transmitted through her eyes to men who observed her and might inflame them in various ways, and that, of course, was not acceptable. So no. The best of these arguments, actually, had to do with the limits of incest. You know this one?
I don't
think
so.
True. They were asked in Qom to determine what is okay and not okay. Can you marry your first cousin, etc., etc. The question arose of the aunt by marriage. Was that an incestuous relationship if you were to have relations with your aunt by marriage? I mean, it might be improper, you know, and upsetting to your uncle. But was it actually incestuous to have relations with your aunt by marriage? And at the end they decided that it was incestuous and not to be allowed, but there was an exception. The exception was if you were not able to control the entry into your bed of the aunt by marriage. What then followed was not your fault. And for example, they said, if the aunt by marriage lived in the bedroom upstairs and the floor collapsed, and the aunt by marriage landed in your bed from above, well, no man could be expected to restrain himself. So, I mean, I'm telling you these as kind of funny stories, but you can see that the problem of honor culture leads to these kinds of appalling aberrations.
Right.
And at its worst, of course, leads to the phenomenon of honor killings.
Yes.
Which sadly are not less prevalent than they used to be, more probably.